Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Mary Ann Hensley. I'm the Vice President of Media Operations here at FreightWaves, and we are happy to present today's webinar in partnership with our friends at Redwood Logistics. I'm excited to be here today as we discuss the findings of our latest research conducted in partnership with Redwood, which focuses on how shippers can streamline their logistics systems for better integration and overall efficiency. I'm joined by Kevin Hill, Head of Research here at FreightWaves, to talk through the findings of the study, as well as Eric Rempel, Chief Innovation Officer for Redwood, who will be sharing his thoughts around what the Redwood team has seen in this area and some tips for success as well. But before we get started, if you have any issues during the webinar, you can reach out to our team via the group chat or audience chat function in your webinar console. Kevin and Eric will also be taking your questions live, so you can enter those through the Q&A box as those come to you throughout the webinar. We will also be sending a link to the recording of this webinar tomorrow in case you'd like to view it on demand or share it with your colleagues. And finally, we have included a link within your console where you can download the complimentary white paper upon which today's discussion is based. So we invite you to do that as well. And at this point, without any further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Kevin to kick us off.
Thank you very much, Mary Ann, and thanks to our audience out there for tuning in, and Redwood and Eric for joining us. We're going to have a great conversation today about efficiencies, integrations, and technology, and kind of where the industry is going, certainly where it's at right now, and as it relates to integrations, but kind of room for growth, what market participants are seeing, coming from the survey that FreightWaves did with Redwood recently. So let's kick it off here. Eric, thanks for joining us. If you wanted to introduce yourself or say a few words, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Kevin. Yeah, I'm Eric Rempel. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for Redwood, and yeah, excited for today's webinar. Hopefully we can make it a little interactive, have some room at the end for Q&A, and I guess let's jump in.
Perfect. So let's start off with some of the key survey findings that we found in this year's survey. And one of those is, while supply chains are now more connected than ever, the integration snowball is just beginning to build momentum. A lot of runway space left on that. Shippers are looking for efficiencies in their logistics network and believe they can increase these efficiencies by anywhere from 50 to 100% in some cases, and we'll dive into the details of that in just a few moments. When given several options, shippers reported being most concerned about recessionary forces negatively impacting demand and profitability. I think that's a concern for most industries right now, especially retailers heading into Q4 and peak season. Shippers are also looking to not only invest more in technology, but to also dedicate resources to fully utilizing new tools to drive efficiencies. And then Redwood Connect allows shippers to connect their applications and systems to their TMS platforms through a quick, easy to navigate process. So if we jump in here to kind of industry and size of respondents, and this is based on those survey responses that we got, and this is kind of the landscape. And Eric, feel free to jump in anywhere you'd like, especially on the kind of the demographics and segmentations. Anything noteworthy that you're surprised about or that you're interested about, especially since you've seen the full survey so far?
Yeah, I think we have. I mean, the breakdown here really just represents the survey, but I think regardless of which vertical we're talking about within our industry, the challenges are the same, and I think we'll jump into that in a bit here, as we move forward.
Perfect. So what we see is the industry breakdown, a lot of others, and then estimated annual transportation and shipping costs here. That $1 to $20 million bucket. That's the majority of shippers out there. How integrated are supply chain networks now? We'll take a look at this. And on a scale of 1 to 100, we asked our respondents to please rate how connected your supply chain network is, specifically how integrated your systems are. And we got around that 60% or 60 index score on this question. What are your thoughts about that, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, this one is it's the little bit less than 7 rule, right? So, a good way to know if a restaurant is good is you ask, score the restaurant from 1 to 10, and you're not allowed to say 7, right? So you're forced for an 8 or a 6.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is a little bit below that 7 rule. So it seems like, there is connectivity there, but what we see, and certainly a core driver for one of our business strategies, is that there's room for improvement, whether systems are not connected at all or they're connected but not giving the type of automation and full end-to-end control that organizations are looking for.
I read that the same way. I read it to where there's a lot of runway left. There's a lot of improvement left. That we're in the early innings. I could use a bunch of different analogies, but the early innings of this ball game, and probably just scratching the surface on integrations right now. Probably the low hanging fruit, or the easiest possible, and really to drive efficiencies. You get into those deeper integrations, those more maybe complex integrations, or derivative.
I think that's right. Just kind of, again, we're reading into 2 numbers here, so we got to be careful. But as we talk to folks in the office, it's exactly what you mentioned, Kevin, which is it's a journey, not a destination. And supply chains, as we know right now, and not to beat the dead horse, right? But they're volatile and they're fragile, and when you need to refactor them physically, you need to follow them digitally, and the ability to do that is what makes great versus good versus great.
Exactly. We'll flip over here, and in a more efficient world, in your estimation, how much more efficient can you be at your job with more streamlined logistics systems, if at all? We have, everyone should be more efficient with technology. We have that, what was it, less than 10% over here that don't feel that technology or they can be any more efficient at their jobs. But certainly you have 2 big buckets, I think, anywhere from 5 to 100% more efficient. And just want to break down maybe profiles of those companies or those processes a little bit, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one, right, it would make me less efficient. There's always an element of change management and getting folks to understand that change is scary, but, a little bit of training and a little bit of adaptation to, additional technology, helps often when we help implement change management. There's folks who say, I've been doing it this way for 20 years and, there's no faster way. And then a few weeks after go live, right, they can't remember the old way. As far as that second bullet goes, it's not a factor in my efficiency. I'm almost certain that that's a robot replying to that, where it's not a real human saying that, it can't help. So I'll skip that one. But then you see kind of that normal distribution across, 1 to 5 to 100%. Everyone just kind of feels that, there's some amount of efficiency. And I think the word efficiency and even streamlined logistics, right, there's some ambiguity in that. But if you try to get the general pulse of the question and, what the intent is do I think that as a percentage of, let's just say, my time, and then time translates to, whether that's, true logistics spend, or if it's even just, FTE efficiency, or how you look at, even let's just say, OPEX dollars, there's room for improvement. And the question then becomes, is it a tool? Is it a connection? Is it a combination of both? Is it workflow automation? And I think, at least in my perception, the answer is it's the right combination of the things that your organization thinks it needs. And that's really where we focus, which is, the fundamental answer is everyone can be more connected and more efficient. But the reality is every organization, every 3PL, every shipper is different. And, they need to automate around the way they do business and not the other way around.
Yeah, and I always get the feeling whenever I look at this question right here is that was maybe 2 questions ago, but the rating 1 to 100, how connected you are, how integrated and how efficient, is that it depends on where you land on that spectrum, how more efficiencies you can drive in your process. If you're well along in that journey, then probably maybe a little bit more less efficient to going forward. And if you're not that far down that journey, the more efficiencies that you can drive, and maybe that's that has a part to play in the range here. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree, right? It's almost like once you've seen the art of the possible, then you can imagine, what your world would be like if you had, more connectivity, more automation. A lot of times, when we work with folks who have been unable to make that digital transformation or are just at the beginning of that journey, it almost seems like, an unimaginable mountain to climb. But you get that base level of connectivity where, your order systems and your TMSs and your WMSs are, synchronized, and, your trading partners and all of the EDIs flowing, and, all of that happens. All of a sudden, folks who were, chasing productivity now have it, and now are thinking about what's next, right? And so it's neat to see, to your point, where that amount of productivity that people think they can get doesn't really plateau until you get to the 100% of, hey, could I double what I'm doing right now? And still some folks think they can.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some folks can, really. I mean, it just depends on. Go ahead.
No, I totally agree. Most folks can. It's just a matter of taking that journey, right? And, analyzing where you are today, and, hitting those singles and doubles towards where you want to go, and not trying to tackle it all overnight.
Yep. And in your estimation, how much more efficient? Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button there. What's influencing your technology spend today, and what are you watching moving forward? So here, we asked the respondents to rate 1 to 5, 5 being completely agree, 1 being completely disagree, in the following statements, right? And the first one here is, it's easy for myself and others at my company to navigate the various parts of our logistics system. And then my company has invested more money into revamping and connecting its systems since COVID started. Let's just start with kind of those basic 2 and go from there, Eric.
Yeah, again, like, these are kind of the right down the middle questions, right? So the 5, from 1 to 5, seeing that a lot of folks pick 3 for those first 2, it's like, yeah, I can navigate, parts of my logistics system. Some feel they can, some feel they can't. And that's about average, which is you have folks who live within, let's say, one system, just the TMS, right? But they're not connected to the yard or the warehouse management side of things. They can work within, their, core area, but do they have a full, again, another overused term a little bit, but control tower view of what's going on within their entire supply chain? And again, with the second, which tells us that, again, a little bit more than half, whether it's COVID or just the general inconsistencies and turbulence that we've seen in our industry, since the, beginning of the pandemic, and even before that, that organizations realize that, whether it's nearshoring or a different warehousing strategy, or, how they're looking at even today, right, the contract versus spot market, how do I react to that, closer to real time than being, a delayed reactionary organization? And that's really, the macro view, I think, of these questions, which is, what challenges are you facing today, but what are those patterns? And can you adapt as quickly as possible when, your supply chain strategy needs to follow, not just your business strategy, but, what's going on with the broader world?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right on that. And that brings us to number 3, investments, and it gets more positive, right? And we're getting into the 4 category here on agreeing, and my company has plans to invest more money into modernizing its systems in the next 12 months. I think COVID was a huge watershed event for a number of different industries, certainly for the supply chain. But it's really about adopting technology, about becoming more automated because we had to. Though there wasn't any risk of being out there first. It was almost like all reward because you had to. You really didn't have a choice. You didn't have the choice to test case this and drag your feet about it. You had to move fast, and I think it paid off positively for a lot of companies that traditionally have been very risk averse on trying new things, including technology or integrations, anything like that.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would kind of look at the third question with a little bit of a lens toward the fifth question as well, as it relates to the economic uncertainty that the world is facing right now. But I'm a firm believer, and I've seen it multiple times throughout my career, where the best organizations are either built or solidified during economic downturns. When you invest those dollars, and specifically those capex dollars around a time that perhaps you have a little bit more time to breathe, right? The spot market isn't so hot. You can deal with longer term projects and planning, and have those corporate sponsors that want to go down that journey to be more prepared for what comes next when the market picks back up, which it will, right? Everything is cyclical, and whether it's 6 months away or years away, you want to come out of whatever we're going into stronger. And so when I look at the third question of the next 12 months, I'm encouraged by that, not just as a provider of services around connectivity and logistics optimization, but really even for our organization ourselves, because that's our plan. Is we're doubling down on a lot of investment right now, because when time comes and the market goes crazy again, you need to be prepared to service your customers. And so I look at that question, and then I look at it in contrast to number 5. There's always a little bit of fear, right, as it relates to opening up your wallet when we hear news about what the Fed is doing and what that has to consumer confidence, what that does to consumer confidence, and how all those cascading effects happen. But it's not a negative number, right? It's not under that 3 line. So we're seeing that organizations are really thinking that even though the purse strings might get tighter, it is the time to invest, because we can focus on the type of organization we want to be versus who we are today.
And empirically, scientifically, there's study after study after study that proves that point, right? Is that, when the market softens, that's the time to grow. That's time to deploy cash, get yourself into a growth mode. And if you look at the top growing companies around, that's a strategy that almost all of them employ, is doubling down in soft markets. And that's really how you get supersonic growth. That's how you keep your growth levels up and consistent. If you're always retrenching or retreating during down cycles and conserving cash or holding on to everything, growth is elusive to you.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yep. And I do want to touch upon one here that we didn't touch upon, because I think it's pretty interesting. Historically, my company has been open to feedback from employees about inefficiencies from unintegrated systems. I think that's a very important point here, is that getting that employee user feedback about different systems, about the plan going forward, or the strategy going forward is very important to building work processes and a tech stack or system that is built for the long term.
Yeah. When you think about, let's just say, a strong company, right? The word empathy isn't the first thing that comes into mind, but I think it should be, right? Does an organization have empathy around its users and what they're feeling on a daily basis? Because those are the people that ultimately, bring everything down to the bottom line, right? So if folks within the organization are saying, I'm so frustrated because I have to manually enter data into systems, or the orders from our order management system aren't in the TMS in real time, so I can't optimize, and we're missing out on consolidation opportunities, and everything in between that, these are the folks who you could wake them up in the middle of the night, ask them any question about your supply chain, and they're going to have the answer instantly. So these are the people we need to enable with better tools so that they can automate, the common stuff and use all of that, intellectual horsepower to solve the harder and, more valuable problems. So, going back to that point on empathy, if an organization, and it's great to see it's closer to 4, if an organization hears people complaining about things, right? A complaint doesn't necessarily mean a bad term, right? It means there's an idea or a pain point that, should be understood.
Yeah, same thing in sales. Complaints or concerns, objections, or just opportunities. It's opportunities to get better.
Although I still do like the grenade for the complaint department, right? Where it's like taking down the...
I did too.
It's just one, yeah.
Oh, so let's flip over here to what trends you're watching. There's a lot of trends going on right now. Over the last 3 years, has been a trend machine. It seems like. So we're same thing. We're rating 1 to 5, 5 being most watched, 1 being least watched. Market level trends. I guess I'll start off with asking you which of these trends really sticks out in your mind, Eric.
You know, I think obviously I'm hyper biased towards connected supply chain. So for me, it's number 2, right? And how do you create connectivity? Because our thesis is you can't optimize what you can't connect, and so the more that supply chains are connected between their systems and their partners, the more optionality you have to create a ton of profit within your organization. But we're seeing. I think the results kind of speak to what everyone's talking about in the kind of short term, which is from scope 1 to scope 3, ESG initiatives and what that means from carbon capture. We recently launched an ESG program we call Redwood Hyperion, which is just named after the tallest redwood tree. But it's really about what are small things that we can do to do stuff like carbon credit offsetting. But I think a lot of folks on this call will realize that if you're in engineering and supply chain, you've been, green equals lean and has for a long time, right? Consolidation, multi-stop optimization, DC, refactoring and planning on where your capacity should be located. Those are all efforts to reduce mileage in order to reduce cost, but reducing cost also can be green, right? And so those two can go hand in hand, and we're seeing a lot more of that naturally, almost getting rebranded, right, as stuff that logistics engineers have done for decades, but now, has a different tone underneath it. As it relates to government regulations, whether that's in regards to ESG, some of the new climate bills, or even, how we can accelerate, things like platoons on the highway for, vehicle technology investment. Those are things that, there's a link between those answers, and almost, one follows the other that we'll have to be on the lookout for. I do think folks in our industry are a little bit tired of listening to the, autonomous trucking and electric vehicles. I think we're waiting for, for them at scale, and everyone's in and excited about it. But we have to see, how that gets rolled out with infrastructure and, the ability to manage those for long haul routes and, short haul platoons. But I think everyone's excited for it. We just want to see how we get to participate. But all of these things, whether it's transparency or even the recessionary forces, government regulations, or even, a desire to track what you move, be underneath an ESG umbrella. A lot of those have to do with connectivity, because the data itself is going to help you drive that decision. So, if you do have that connected supply chain and your data is being normalized, and, whether it's going to, a modern cloud data warehouse, or, even something a bit less sophisticated where your analysts can see what's going on and measure things with data rather than, the hippo effect, which is the highest paid person in the organization is making decisions. Winning with data changes how organizations react. And I think that if you, again, zoom out on these questions and think about what they mean, it's how do I react to changes in the market? And our thesis is with a connected supply chain where all your systems and trading partners talk and you have access to all of that data, you can react hyper quickly to any of these forces rather than, being a delayed, laggard behind.
Yeah, I see it the same way. I see it, starting with question 3 right here, regulations, recessionary forces, and then autonomous. I think, and certainly on autonomous, I think all 3 of those for most people in the audience right now are things outside of their control, right? You can't control the economy. You can't control government regulations. And whenever autonomous or electric vehicles, whenever that happens, it happens. Right, and you made a really excellent point. Is if you're focusing on what you can control, which is connectedness, right? Then you can be in a much better position to react to any of these changes, right? And we were talking about it yesterday. The autonomous, we don't know what that's going to look like. So why are you spending too much time thinking about it or planning for it? Because once it gets here at scale, it's going to look much differently than what it looks like now. And it's hard to implement anything before that happens.
Yeah. And an interesting thing about autonomous, right, is if you think about the level of efficiency that autonomous will bring to the industry, and let's just stick with an easy one. Let's just say highway platooning, right? So ignore final mile and, long haul and recharging and all of those challenges. But if you think about that, you're going to have a lot of capacity, right, running on regular routes, almost like a rail system. And so, how do you make sure that you can fit into and out of, these schedules, right, of almost these sailing schedules of these, autonomous platoons, and take advantage of that price and capacity? Well, that's going to be with data. You're not, and so if you want to take advantage of that, and be as price conscious as you can and get the service levels that you need, it's going to have to be with good data.
And connected, right? You have to be connected to those systems to be able to get in there and reserve your capacity, because it's going to be much harder if you're not connected. If you don't have the data, then you can't make the decision. So it kind of all rolls into one standard solution, right?
Yep.
Okay, so what do shippers look for in partners? We'll flip over here. And when making decisions on supply chain partners, please rank the following by their importance, 5 being the most important. And we see low cost and high service side by side. What are your thoughts on that, Eric?
Well, find me anyone who doesn't want, low cost, on time, every time carrier, and I'll find you a liar. But,
I know, right? But the real question is how do you do that? And I think you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, again, surprise, it's with, connectivity, right? So do you have, real-time access to, market capacity, right? So, at Redwood, we do a lot with, getting data from the marketplace and then, using machine learning algorithms to predict capacity against rates and figuring out where carriers will be and, getting them, the right truck, the right load at the right time for the right truck. So again, it's just economies of scale and efficiencies, right? So at what levels can you, buy enough to reduce costs and optimize how you keep, carriers loaded in order to get, the good carriers that can, if you're filling their network and helping them improve OR, right, that's how you get those first two in tandem. So it has to be with, a connected ecosystem. It has to be, leveraging data, and we're seeing a lot of that in the market, right, whether it's a Redwood solution or by anyone else, which is, how do we predict capacity and then how do we leverage that in order to optimize cost? And again, as we see the market shifting again to, contracted rates versus spot, it's a great time to work with partners, right, and reduce a bit of volatility within, your carrier network and rationalize a little bit to, try and give enough capacity to the right partners at the right time to get the best of both worlds.
You do, and it is low cost and high service is the goal to everybody, but it doesn't really tell you much about how. And you just have laid out a really good case on how you do that, because those are the goals, those are the objectives. That's what you should be driving for. But it's not the process. It's not the process. It's that end result.
Right. Yeah, and I think, the other choices, right? So if we think about, sustainability, right, you just have to look at that into organizations are reporting, to the board level that, ESG is on their mind. And so it's becoming law, right? It's something that we have to think about. It's also the right thing to do. So if you go down that path, there's a lot of value there, but it still has to follow the first two, right? Which is reducing cost and improving service. And then if you think about things like, dedicated ops, right? Am I a widget company or am I a logistics company, right? And some organizations are great at both, right? And some need help, right? And so when they want to outsource and, when we help with stuff like that, it's how do we understand your network? But it all leads to understanding from the rightmost column, which is technology first. You picked your systems, you picked your TMS, you might have a homegrown order management system. All of that data is uniquely yours, and the partners you work with are uniquely yours. But how do we leverage that data to help the four left columns find value? And that again is through data, right? It all sounds so simple and like we're repeating it over and over, but it's true, which is if the systems are connected and if the data is cleansed and organized and when a transaction happens, the other system knows exactly what it has to do next. Magical things start to happen, but they're really not that magic. They're predetermined by supply chain managers on how they want automation to work within their supply chains.
So, Eric, we've been talking about integrations and connectivity, data for the webinar, the surveys based on that. Since you're here, I'd like to pick your brain a little bit. And I guess my first question would be, What do shippers struggle with the most when it comes to technology integrations? Kind of what are some of the tripping points, or you know,
Yeah.
the parts where that they need the most help with, or they have the most questions with, whatever that might be.
Yeah, so I think it's twofold, right? There's the ability to get resources internally, right? So there's always that IT struggle between, keeping the lights on and all of the stuff that IT is dealing with, from, security and, managing, the organization, and an SAP implementation and all of those things. And in just trying to get a resource to say, hey, it's time for us to optimize how we look at logistics and supply chain and, connectivity. That might be a back burner item that takes some time, right? So just getting those resources is tough. So, that's the first part. The second part is, back to, are you a organization that focuses on widgets or on supply chain? Supply chain data is complex, right? And these connections are risky. So a lot of these organizations, let's just say that they have some IT bandwidth, and they have the ability to now, connect to, I'll pick on a partner of ours, Project 44, right? Do they have the capability to now understand, how do I register a load? How do I get those tracking updates back? How do I send them to the right system when I have two TMSs? All of that kind of stuff requires a huge amount of collaboration between, the supply chain group and the logistics group and IT. So, the biggest struggle is really just one of time and understanding, not even, a technological challenge itself in terms of, real connectivity. But it's really one of, do we have folks that are available, and do the folks that do the work speak the same language as the people who have the need? And that, I think, is the biggest challenge time and time again.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's something that I hear in the market all the time too. Is a lot of it is the time and resources dedicated to it. I think everybody wants to do it. I think people want to be more connected. It's defining that time and resources, and really talking about what the status quo, what the new era would be besides the status quo, right? And because that's usually the biggest. The biggest impediment is the fear of the unknown.
Yep. So it has to be a conversation about value, right? Which is, what is the value that connectivity is going to bring to my organization, right? And when we say connectivity, we mean connectivity through Redwood Connect, where, whether it's using a traditional iPass or, having IT write code between systems, those can work for a bit of time, but how do they scale? Who manages those? What happens when you want to make a change? Does that person still, work at the organization? It's tough to get IT resources right now, so can you find a way to move away from, the typical challenge of, we'll get to it when we get to it, and it's really complex and risky and it might not go well, to, yeah, we can just connect and plug in these systems and they can talk, and I can get a value conversation going around how I can change my business, and not necessarily even talking about connectivity, but the outputs of that connectivity as value.
Yeah, I mean, did you have a recent example or share an example of Redwood Connect and kind of an integration that you've done recently, and kind of the objectives of that, and kind of the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, what I mentioned earlier is the patterns are all the same, which is organizations need, reliable, scalable connectivity that just works, right? So, to be able to answer the question, did it work? Is it working? Did it go well the first time, and are you done? And for us, right, all of those fundamentally, on the shipper side at least, start with orders going from whatever system is, managing, how they buy and sell, and getting to transportation management in real time for planning. So, purchase orders and sales orders getting transformed and streamed in real time from a legacy green screen system, or, modern SAP for HANA, or anything in between. How do those orders get to, a TMS for planning? And if you're a 3PL or LSP, right, how do I connect my TMS to, all of my trading partners? How do I deal with EDI? How do I balance, EDI and Project 44 and MacroPoint and 4Kites and all the other choices I have out there, and, optimize around the way I do things? And can I just say what I want to work and it works, versus needing to worry about long, drawn out IT processes? But it all starts with, a shipment or an order that needs to get planned. And when those are in the system, all of a sudden you can really change the way you operate on a daily basis.
And when you start this process, I mean, how much, I guess, how much IT resources do you really need to start down the road, whether it's with Redwood Connect or just generally thinking about integrations and connectivity? I mean, what kind of infrastructure is a baseline, or is there one?
Yeah. So I'll answer the Redwood Connect one, and I'm proud of this one, which is just about nothing on our customer side. We're an event-based system, so our customers can send us whatever they want in any format they want and any protocol they want. And, we use our pipelines to get it where it needs to be and transform the data back so that their IT departments don't have to do anything. They send us what they can and what, they already know how to do, and we transform it and get it back to them however they want. Traditionally, and where we came from as an enterprise, is a very expensive, very infrastructure heavy, very complex initiative, because you need to think about, your enterprise architects, your workflow consultants, and then you have to think about your API gateways and, where you're going to have your cloud hosting and where does that go in terms of, data transformations. How do I distribute all of that workload? What happens if I have 1 million, rate requests coming from a customer at a time, and there's different customers, who gets priority? I could go on for hours, right? So all of those things require a lot of thought about infrastructure and parallelism and scale. And we wanted to take that away from our customers. So what we really did is said, can you just design a data pipeline, with visual workflow for supply chain that just works, and understand, transportation lifecycle management from quote to cash? Put those kind of automations with, this visual designer in place, and it handles the scale, multi-region failover, high availability, reporting on your data, just in a software as a service subscription. And that's what we deliver to our customers. So they just get the value out of it and don't have to worry about, massive infrastructure at scale. We've taken that all away.
And that's one of the benefits of SaaS, or software as a service, right? Is that you don't need that infrastructure. Yep. So maybe you answered it. We have another question here, and I'll do this. How can I find out if Redwood Connect integrates with the systems I use? Only certain proprietary integrators, or is it an open ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the last decade, or actually more, since 2010, since we've been doing this, and we've been through a few iterations now of Redwood Connect, but from day one, we believed in open ecosystems. It was not just which systems can you connect to, but which partners, right? So, we're a digital 4PL, but we give more business to some of our 3PL competitors than we do to ourselves. So you can pick any service provider, onboard your, carriers and 3PLs and, brokers and all of the partners that you want in your ecosystem, as well as any technology you want. And there is no limit to which system you can connect to. We have connected to just about anything, homegrown, cloud. We've never said no. We've even written custom connectors for, some large Fortune 50 shippers that have some systems that are still hanging around from the 1980s that, had no way of connecting. And, we helped with, find ways to get those systems talking. So for us, it's what is easiest for an IT org that's already overwhelmed. They can send us anything they want, any way they want, and we'll get it back to them the way that works best for them. So it's a multi-protocol, multi-format, from EDI to API and everything in between. We just want to make it easy for organizations to have a connected, supply chain ecosystem.
Always good to make it easy and simple, right? Because it can get complex quite easily.
That's right.
You can. Yeah. So we've been talking about data connectivity. We've been talking about trends too, and I'd like to ask you a question about trends and kind of what you see for the freight markets, whether it's supply and demand, capacity going into 2023, or technology, kind of the trends that Eric is watching out for right now, and you're keeping closely tuned in on.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think everyone has noticed that the trends in our industry, at least, that used to take multiple years now happen in months, right? So, and hopefully everyone's doing okay down in Florida right now. But, you've got hurricanes, right? You've got, an averted rail strike. You've got all of these potential challenges that are constantly taking place. And we're just watching, one, ricochet to the, to our network after another. But there is a slowdown, right? We've all seen it and we've all noticed it. And I think right now, the trends and patterns we're watching really go back to the question you mentioned earlier, which is what type of investments are organizations going to make during this time when you have a second to breathe and you can focus on improving your organization. That's really what we're watching, because Kevin, to your earlier point, a lot of the other stuff we just can't control, right? I can't control what the Fed's going to do. I can't control consumer sentiment. I can't control, everything in between. But what I can control is knowing that, a world worth living in is one where you have optimized, supply chains to get people what they need the way they need it, right? From, life-saving equipment to, goods, and, that they're purchasing online. And how do we make that a more streamlined process, to go back to the other question, right? Lower cost and better service.
Lower cost and better service. That's the goal. That's not the how, though, right? But we've been talking about the how, and it's been a great webinar. Thank you so much to Eric for joining us. Do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap it up?
No, I mean, I think reach out to Redwood if you want to chat about, a connected supply chain or an open ecosystem, or, for those, 3PLs or software vendors looking to participate and be part of a larger open network. Let us know. We have a partnership program that we're growing, because we really do believe in collaboration across our space. And I just thank you and the team for your time today.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mary Ann to say the final thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. And everyone listening in, that brings us to the end of our presentation today. So we hope you found the discussion insightful as you plan for the coming months and year ahead. Can't believe we're already here. Just a reminder to click the link in your console to download the white paper that serves as the basis for today's discussion if you've not already done that. But thank you all for taking the time to listen in, to our friends at Redwood for partnering with us on today's webinar, and of course to Kevin and Eric for being here with us today to share your insights. We appreciate you being here and hope you'll join us again for another webinar very soon.
Thanks so much.